Today we are looking at a 25 marker question from Edexcel Economics Paper 1. This is from the 2025 paper, and it reads, evaluate the likely microeconomic effects of building major infrastructure projects. Okay, so we've got, this context about HS2. We're not required to use it, but they're giving us this information, so we have the option of using it, and I think it makes sense to refer to this as our example. So when we're looking at microeconomic effects, I'm probably going to want, two paragraphs, primarily. We'll do that later. For each of these, I'm going to get a knowledge, application, analysis, and then an evaluation. I'm going to do two of those, and then we're going to have like a big evaluation kind of summing up paragraph at the end, a conclusion, if you will. And generally also I'll do a couple of sentences of introduction, right? Normally some definitions if those are relevant. Here, major infrastructure projects, nothing super leaping to mind for me in terms of definitions. So what are the major microeconomic effects? I want one positive and one negative, right? So one positive, we're going to go with lowering business costs. And one of the reasons I'm interested in this is going to allow me to use our business cost curve diagram, which is this one. This is for monopolies. We would be able to use the non-monopolistic one, right? This is just sort of demonstrating what happens with the monopolies, but you would use the same diagram without the supernormal profit potentially. And that's going to give you a good chunk of sort of knowledge stuff, right? So I like using that for that reason. And then I'd probably come up with the one negative, and just given the context here about, environmental destruction, let's go with externalities, and that's going to allow us to use like an externalities diagram. So let's get that up. Let's go externalities diagram. Let's get something like this. Let's see. Positive consumption. I want negative. I'm getting you a picture. I don't want to draw it. Here, yeah, this will do. Copy image. Okay, so two diagrams, that's good going. That'll take care basically of our knowledge marks. Maybe throw a definition in there as well, but generally if you've got a diagram that's covering your bases on knowledge. Okay, so what's the sort of application here? Well, we can use maybe some information. Let's come up with the analysis first, right? What's the explanation for why this lowers business costs, and what effect does that have on the fortunes of those businesses? Well, there's lower costs. What are the costs that it might lower? Well, it might lower labor costs because it allows access to a wider labor pool. So basically increasing competition in the labor pool, which potentially drives down the wages that businesses have to offer their employees. It allows for a bit more like flexibility basically in who you can hire, because a big transportation project is going to connect you to London, connect you to a city, and therefore allow you access to more people who can work for a business potentially. I might also look at transportation costs for businesses that are going to have, we're talking here, I think, we'll use the HS2 example, right? So we're focusing on maybe transportation infrastructure. So this should lower transportation costs because maybe it decreases or creates a more direct route. So you get a reduction maybe in like fuel costs, that sort of stuff for transportation. Other costs that this is going to potentially reduce. Again, it depends maybe on the type of project. It could potentially give you access to more customers as well, but this is, I want to focus mainly on the cost side of things. We can talk a little bit about demand as well if we want. That might be another factor in this. The effect once we have lowered a cost, these is going to lower our average cost and marginal cost curves, right? So this is going to basically, we could demonstrate this on the diagram, right? Because you have those curves coming down, like physically coming down as we're reducing both our marginal costs and our average cost. This is because it's specifically our variable costs that seem to be coming down, right? Potentially as well as fixed costs. It depends how you're classifying labor. Labor, if it's per hour, generally is considered variable, but if it's salaried, that's more of a fixed cost. it does tend to increase as you increase output. So it's kind of variable. But we'll be looking at lowering our average cost and the cost curve. What does this allow us to do? Well, we've got two options. Either supranormal profit in in monopoly markets, illustrated by this diagram, or in competitive markets allows companies to increase production. And this is because of the intersection point basically with the demand curve, right? If you look, we would be able to intersect further to the right. We would have higher quantity if our cost curves were lower, because that would mean that we would sort of break even at a higher level of production if our costs are lower. And then if you want, here we can talk about like the ability to serve more customers, the microeconomic effects of that. But this is a pretty meaty analysis, right? And it ties in very directly to this example. My application, I'm going to look at like reducing the journey time by 45 minutes, 54 minutes between London and Manchester. This becomes commutable, right? An hour and 11 minutes. I think that's kind of key for our... I mean, it's a long commute, but it's possible. And also, you've got to think there's going to be sort of stops along the way. But we could, refer to, ports or something like that. Some kind of practical example would be good. In terms of an evaluation, like what is the criticism of lowering business costs? Are there any reasons to think this might increase business costs? Or are there reasons to think it won't have like the strong effect that we're looking for it to have? Well, one of the things that might happen is in monopoly markets or oligopoly markets, there may not be as much pressure to increase production if supernormal profit is high at lower production levels. So maybe we don't have the effect of increased production that we're looking for. That would be potentially a criticism, right? We're not saying that lower costs won't happen, but this is maybe a caveat to the idea that that this project is going to, massively improve business costs, and therefore, we're going to be able to make a ton more stuff. Like maybe that's not going to happen if we're looking at monopolies. We might also look at like might harm local labor markets if the surrounding area is less nice to live in. So maybe that's a counterpoint to the lower labor costs, right? Just something to indicate that maybe, if we build a massive highway through lovely fields, maybe we're making the local area less pleasant, and therefore we're going to have a smaller pool of workers. All of those are potential evaluation points. I think this is reasonably clearly something that would happen, but you might also have, as in the lower labor costs, I think is likely to happen. I think this is maybe the more interesting evaluation. Okay, so then let's look at these externalities. What's the argument here, right? The idea is that the cost, the social marginal cost of environmental damage is not priced into the consumption, the consumption of this private good, right? Right, so we have a social marginal cost that's basically higher than our private marginal cost. Again, we're kind of analyzing the diagram. This creates a deadweight loss. You can view this in the context of the diagram, right? And for our example, we might talk about something like HS2 could be built through critical environments, harming local animal populations, could produce pollution. So again, we're talking about deadweight loss. I might be specific about this, right? So it might be pollution may create negative health outcomes, which in the long run could harm, it's a bad thing objectively, but I suppose in dispassionate economic terms, in the long run, it could harm labor productivity, and it could harm government revenues and creates a cost for government, right? Because you've got to take care of them in the NHS potentially. And this is not necessarily a price that's borne by the people constructing the infrastructure project, nor is it really part of if you're consuming that as an infrastructure project. Well, let's think in terms of how we could evaluate this, right? So one evaluation might be shorter travel times would reduce emissions from transportation. So maybe we are creating positive externalities then as well. Maybe we can talk about positive, maybe that will be the focus. So positive externalities. Gosh, could we slip a third diagram in? How thrilling. What are other positive externalities associated with this, right? So we might have like improved labor productivity due to reduced commutes. Stuff like this would make sense, right? Can I think of a real world example of large infrastructure projects harming? I'm sure I could. I can't think of it right now. Okay, and then our conclusion, right? The idea with the conclusion is like, on balance, are we going to have, would a project like HS2 be more of a net positive or more of a net negative? Having explored the business cost angle and having explored the externalities angle, we want to come to kind of a conclusion where we weigh up positives versus the evaluations that we've offered, and we offer a kind of final conclusion. In this case, I think it's going to be a net negative, a net positive, sorry. I think the benefits outweigh the harms. We're also, it's very expensive, isn't it? Let's say net negative. While construction is likely to produce large economic benefits, like reducing business costs, I think the savings to businesses do outweigh the increased costs to businesses. Large infrastructure projects come at significant cost to the government. So this is something we've not like necessarily really done in depth, mainly because it's not super microeconomic, right? But at the end, we could, when we're weighing this up, talk about how these projects tend to run over budget, and therefore like the benefits that we're creating are kind of outweighed by the externalities. Those together are maybe enough to dissuade us from pursuing these kinds of projects.